for those of y'all that don't know us, we focus on speeding up environmental progress. And for the technology team, that mostly means thinking about where better data or technology could help inform environmental decision-making, as well as addressing policy or regulatory barriers that inhibit us from doing so already. But sometimes there are critical data gaps that, if addressed, would dramatically speed up environmental progress. And the project that we're going to talk about today is a perfect example of that. We are going to be diving into the very specific data set of drinking water utility service area boundaries and the progress that we've made in the last year to build out this national picture of who gets drinking water from who. As I mentioned, we have a lot of ground to cover. Our primary goal is to get feedback and hear from folks that have been using this data and improving this data over the last year or so, and to get to this overall question of who is responsible for drinking water. As a couple housekeeping notes, this is going to be recorded for those of us that maybe want to look back at it or aren't able to join today. And we will be sharing all the slides and resources that we cover and follow-up emails, so stay tuned. We have about an hour. It is going to feel inadequate. We have a lot of speakers and a lot of participants, but hopefully this is the start of a conversation and not the end. And we're going to do our best to address any questions that you might have at the end of this. Have about hopefully 20 minutes or so for a rich discussion. And then lastly, we did intentionally make this a meeting rather than a webinar format so that each of y'all could see one another, connect, ask questions in the chat, and hopefully build a relationship with the broader ecosystem of folks that are interested in this topic. And so again, I see folks putting their name, where they're from in the chat, and feel free to do so that, along the way. Next slide. So at EPIC, we believe that we shouldn't have to wonder who is responsible for our drinking water. We should know. There are about 50,000 community water systems across the United States that serve about 90% of the population. And despite the importance of water to health, safety, economic well-being, we don't have a comprehensive, accurate map of who those water systems serve. And by contrast, as many of y'all know, we do have maps of every public and private building across the US, where national park boundaries are, electrical grid, primary and secondary roads. But again, when it comes to water, we do not have the equivalent. And so for the past year, we've been working with partners, many of whom are on this call, in earnest to develop this picture of who gets drinking water from who. And so the good news is that this is possible. It is possible to figure this question out. And in 3 months over the course of 2022, we worked with EPIC, Simple Lab, and the Internet of Water Coalition to develop the process of collating the data where it does exist for about 18 states where that's the case, that made the data publicly available. And then an initial methodology for estimating the service area boundaries, which led to the creation of this national map. And again, big shout out to Ryan Shepard, I see on the call, Emily Wiggins at Internet of Water that really helped in stewarding this data set. But I do want to stress that this is provisional, right? For the places where we approximated the boundaries, it's not accurate, or it's not fully accurate, and we know the data needs to be improved. But rather than waiting for the 100% perfect map, we saw a lot of value in releasing the data because in many instances, better data or approximate data is better than no data. And by daylighting this map, we can encourage and facilitate the local, state, tribal, and federal partners to work together to improve the accuracy. And so since we released it for the first time in May of last year, we've done, I think, 4 or 5 improvements since then, and now have a high quality understanding of where more than half of the US population gets their drinking water from. And so since I see many new folks on the call, we did want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about how this data was created. Again, if you have very detailed questions, we have lots of documentation and we can get into that, but just at a high level, we created a 3-tier system. And we created the tiers primarily so that folks would be able to choose what quality of data they needed for different types of analyses or decisions that they were making. So tier 1 comes directly from state managed databases or from large water utilities that might have this data already. And so when we started this, there were about 12 in that category, and now we have 17 states in the District of Columbia that are in this tier 1 data quality. For the second 2 tiers, these are approximated boundaries based on an approach in matching where the centroid of the water system was and the municipal place or the municipal boundary or the census place. We believe that's right most of the time. I think roughly 80% was what we saw from some of our testing. And so that's good for many different types of decisions, and we can talk about those. But then also for tier 3 is where we could not match the name to a particular place, but we had the boundary or the centroid from the facility information, and then we could create a radius, big or small, depending on how many people that water system served. So both tier 2 and 3 are approximations, but we feel like they're better than having nothing. And so what we're focused on today is really how can state agencies and partners improve the approximations to create an accurate understanding or more accurate understanding of that service area boundary. And bonus, if there's a process for updating that information as the boundaries change over time. And so the good news is that there are many programs that are available to states and local governments to create this data. One in particular that we've seen many states use is the USGS Water Use Data and Research Grant. We can put a link to that in the chat for folks and use that to secure funding to develop this data. And there are also many organizations like WaterSuite, Blue Conduit, Internet of Water that have tools that can help develop this critically important data set. And so I'm going to take a second to now introduce my colleague, Emily Wiggins from Internet of Water, to walk through a preview of their Boundary Sync tool that state and local agencies can use to develop these boundaries.
Thanks, Jessie. So I am Emily Wiggins. I'm a senior analyst at the Internet of Water, and a couple of notes I wanted to share about our Boundary Sync tool. So we know that not all water utilities necessarily have the staff and time resources to create this data if it doesn't exist. So the great thing about Boundary Sync is it's online. You don't need any software. It was actually developed as an open source website. So I will right now, before I forget, hit enter in the chat. There's our GitHub link to the website. And it allows you to upload anything from paper maps to an image of a service area that you might have that's not spatial. So you can see in the nice little GIF on the side, it's really simple to just click and draw and edit in the interface online to create this high quality data. It is moderated, so we're keeping the quality of the data consistent. You can see you review and submit it. And then right now it's set up to be approved by our internal staff. We do include parcel data already in the interface. So again, no other data is needed if you have a paper map or just need the parcel data to draw your boundary. It's set up right away to do that. And we think it will make it easier for anyone who needs to share their data sets by creating them online. So if you or someone you know wants to contribute by using Boundary Sync, we do have a future plan to set up a nice little Google form where you can get access using your email and saying what organization you're a part of, so we know we can maintain the data integrity. But for now, the best thing is going to be just to shoot me an email. So my email is there on the screen if you would like to do that. But we're really hopeful that this will continue to expand upon this great data set that we've worked on with Epic. So I'm now going to turn the mic back over to Joya Banerjee to introduce the other panelists and talk about how federal, state, and tribal community partners can use and improve this data.
Emily, thank you so much. And thank you to all the partners who have had a hand in getting this effort to where it is now. At Epic, we believe that data is only of value if it is useful and used. And so I know there are a lot of technical questions and understanding, wanting to deepen understanding about the methodology. But what we want to do is also hear from some perspectives at the federal, state, tribal, and local level to get a sense of why is this data useful and how can this community help to improve this map, just as Jessie mentioned. So what I'd like to do is we've invited 4 speakers to kick us off here. We have Cheyenne Holliday, who's the Water Justice Coordinator at Verde. Welcome, Cheyenne. It's great to see you. We have Michael Plastino from the Drinking Water Information Systems Branch at EPA. Michael, hello. It's lovely to see your face as well. And coming to us from New Mexico, we have Julie Valdez, who is with the New Mexico Office of State Engineer. And finally, Newakis Weber from the Chickasaw Nation. She's a water resource manager. Thank you all for spending some time with us here today. I think what I'll do is just go in order. I'm going to stop sharing my slides so that people can, in case that helps people to see your smiling faces. But maybe what I'll do is ask Cheyenne if you would be willing to kick us off. What are you seeing in terms of this data? How can it be useful? And do you have any advice for this community in putting that data to use?
Yes, thank you for having me. So hello, my name is Cheyenne Holiday. I am the Water Justice Coordinator at Verde, but I am also a part of the Oregon Water Futures Collaborative. Our collaborative is at the intersection of water and environmental justice interests, working with Indigenous peoples, communities of color, low-income communities, and academic institutions. And over the past 3 years, we have been engaging with and facilitating conversations across the state with people to understand how they interact with water, identify culturally specific ways of resiliency, and really just start to build the water advocacy muscle in Oregon. We have learned that community members in Oregon care deeply about their water and have extensive knowledge and experience to contribute to achieving Oregon's water justice goals, but they are facing significant barriers to participating in policy and infrastructure discussions. Throughout the last 3 years, we have been asked almost in every conversation for more water information. And when they do get information, it is inaccessible. So community members are asking for accessible information provided in multimedia formats and in various languages. They want to know where their water comes from, who manages it, how it is being charged. They want to know about well water and if their wells are drying up. They want to know if their water's clean in their home to cook, drink, and wash with. One of the biggest challenges that we have seen is a lack of trust with community members and water authorities. This is largely driven by significant information and communication gaps. For example, we heard from families in Eastern Oregon who had concerns about their water quality because of its taste, smell, and color. The majority of participants were renters and did not receive any water quality information. And when we were trying to work with them, we could not find information about their water quality. For participants who did receive water quality information, it was not presented in a way that was accessible, whether it was due to language, complexity of the information, and the design and format on how it was presented. We've identified that water data can help build trust and communication between community members and water authorities. This type of data is also helpful for organizations like mine. As we're listening to stories across the state, we can use this data to connect to maps and actual quality information. We hear a lot about water quality concerns, but we don't have the data or information to back up what community members are saying or feeling. And we're also hoping that data like this can target efforts and resources to communities that are lacking access to drinking water, but also look at communities who do have safe drinking water and bolster communication and outreach efforts to improve public trust. In Oregon, this means putting a greater focus on small water systems, including communities that live in mobile home parks and farmer worker housing. And all that to say is data like this is important to us, and it needs to be accessible and paired with lived experiences that gives communities the agencies to push for creative and meaningful policy change with an impact for generations to come. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Cheyenne, thank you so much. I'm really hearing you on the how this can be a tool to build trust and to connect maps and data with that lived experience. Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you're doing in Oregon. I think what I'm going to do now is turn to Newakis. If you could share a little bit about your experience with the Chickasaw Nation and some of the work that you've done to develop core data sets like this.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Newakis Weber. I am the Water Resources Manager for the Chickasaw Nation Office of Natural Resources, which is in South Central Oklahoma. So there are a lot of reasons that it is important to have a clear picture of the water service area boundaries. For my office, it gives us the opportunity to seek out state and federal funds to improve infrastructure in our communities. We partner with Indian Health Service to look at the water service area and collect data on Native American population by water service provider. So this data is then used to be put into the IHA STARS database, which is a tool they use to submit for projects for federal funding. These projects assist with ensuring Native Americans and the citizens in our territories have access to clean and safe drinking water. We're able to utilize the data to determine if a community may be considered underserved and seek out state and federal funding to assist with their infrastructure needs. Service area mapping is also important for identification of potential regionalization opportunities. So we need a clear picture of the service area and including the lines to determine the most appropriate potential connections. It's also extremely valuable data in the event of drought. This data allows us to work with our providers on emergency connections. So quite a few of our communities have single source water and often lack redundancy in their systems. So this allows them that opportunity. For us, the service area mapping in our territory has been successful because of our partnerships. So we work really closely with our state, local, and IHS partners to collect data and ensure we have a clear picture of the water systems and the infrastructure needs. We work with our local universities and the graduate level students to provide communities who are lacking the skills and technology the ability to digitize their maps. These partnerships really allow us to provide feedback and create a loop of information. So through this partnership, we are sharing information and we are combining our funds to ensure that we are providing our citizens and our communities with access to clean drinking water. So thank you for your time, and I definitely will take questions at the end.
Wonderful, Newakis. Thank you so much. Hearing you on sort of that targeted funding and also the importance of partnership and working across jurisdictions. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I'm now going to turn it to Julie from the state of New Mexico. Julie has had some great success working in this area with her local systems, and Julie would love to hear your perspective on what it takes to do this work and also just how it's being useful for some of the decisions that you are facing in New Mexico.
Sure, thanks. So in an effort to standardize water data collection and compilation in New Mexico, we developed a public supply boundary, which has helped us improve our data integration with the USGS for their national report, the water use in the United States report that's published every 5 years. And the public supply boundary data is also important to New Mexico because it helps us estimate water use by our surface basins, our county, and it helps with the water planning regions. And then the boundary also helps us resolve questions regarding any population served, and it improves gallon per capita per day. It's going to be interesting because this is, we created the boundary, I believe it was in the end of 2019, and we publish our water use by categories report every 5 years. So right now we're working on our 2020 report. So this is going to be the first time that we're using the boundary for our data collection. So if we ever have a future meeting, I would be happy to give you an update on how the data collection works. It's just going to help streamline our collection for that category. And I'm happy to take any questions at the end regarding any of the work that New Mexico is doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm very curious to see how the data collection effort will go now that you have these boundary maps. Great. Well, now I'm going to turn it over to Michael to hear a little bit about the federal perspective on this work, and sitting from EPA, and not to ask you to speak for your sister agencies, but what is the benefit for how might the federal government use this data?
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very happy to represent a large group of us at EPA that have a strong interest in this. And first, I want to give a shout out to everyone involved. This has been a fantastic effort over the last year or two, several years even, across the board, not just EPIC, but states, local communities, tribes, and nonprofit sectors. So it's really impressive what's been achieved so far. So our group within EPA, I'll get to our working group in a moment or two, but We've formed an internal working group for service areas because we've got several different interests in water service areas. I'll describe 4 of them briefly. One of them is the public interest, which Jesse and Cheyenne and Newakis all referred to, as well as Julie. So I think there's been a lot of progress over the years in people knowing where they live, who's serving them from consumer confidence reports and other efforts. But it might not be so evident if you're traveling somewhere else, who's providing that water, or if you're researching a place to live, where that water is coming from. So we see a good value in service areas for that. Second main area is Justice 40. That's the administration initiative that is looking to ensure that 40% of overall benefits of federal water infrastructure investments are flowing to disadvantaged communities. So we see a really large benefit in service areas helping with that effort. A third area is drinking water regulations. There's an executive order 12898 that requires environmental justice analysis be a part of drinking water regulation efforts. So we see a good benefit to that effort, as well as service areas benefiting that effort. And then a fourth area is the nexus between environmental programs and public health. So there's a number of programs within EPA that are wanting to have better information about how their program decisions may or may not impact certain communities. If they make a decision in their program, will that reduce the pollutants and improve the drinking water quality for specific communities? So those are the 4 main areas of that we see at EPA that water system service areas really benefit. So as I mentioned a moment ago, about 6 months ago, we started an internal working group. I'm co-chairing that group along with Andrew Schulman in our Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. We've got a lot of really good, strong participation from a number of different offices and programs throughout the agency. As part of our work over the last several months, we've had several good discussions with EPIC, ASDWA, Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, ECOS, the Environmental Council of States, Indian Health Service, and other groups. So we put a lot of good thought into this over the last many months. We're getting close to finalizing a strategy to implement some actions, and I'll give 3 big picture highlights here and then turn it over to the next speaker. So over the next few months, this strategy is likely to have 3 broad areas that I mentioned. One of them is focusing on developing a data standard. So working with the community to define a standard set of data elements so that there's a good, consistent set of data elements for all the service area creation and sharing. A second is promoting eligibilities that we have in our finance assistance programs for water system service area work. So there's eligibilities under our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, as well as WIN, the Water Infrastructure Investment for the Nation grant program. And then a third area is promoting tools and assisting with practices such as the EPIC playbook that's going to be talked about in this webinar. So those are the 3 main areas that we're looking to move forward on, and we'll have more details in the next few months. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Joya.
Thank you so much, Michael, and what a wonderful update, and thank you for you and your colleagues in the work group that you formed. Really exciting to hear about the strategy and as it's developing. Maybe what I'm going to do, we have a little bit of time. Again, I think Jesse said at the top of the hour that this is going to feel like a mad rush given how many people are on the call, but I would invite you to put any questions that you have for our speakers in the chat, and we will do our best to either field them here and now or connect you with an answer at the end of this call. So you can look to us to help there, but please do use the chat as a place to lob some questions, and I'll ask my colleagues to help me monitor that. But maybe I'll kick off, Michael, building off of your last point about promoting tools. We saw one tool, and again, thank you, Emily, for sharing the boundaries sync. There are other tools out there as well. And I'm actually curious if, Julie, you would share a little bit about the how you went about, how New Mexico was able to work with local systems to get this data. And I believe that was something that you did through a partnership, but please, if you could just say a little bit more about the how and the tools that you used.
Sure. So we applied for one of the USGS grants and we were awarded. So we had some contract money, so we were able to hire our contractor. So she did all the legwork, but really we set up some criteria that we wanted to happen. We know that we are really interested in 2 areas in the state where I was struggling with population for our water use by categories report, and that was the Albuquerque metropolitan area and Doñana County. So that was our big focus, but of course we got public supply boundaries for the other parts of the states, but it was really her calling all of these systems and either obtaining maps or shape files, us looking through our water rights files and seeing what boundaries we already had, looking through different types of plans, conservation plans, water development plans, and then she would take that info and digitize it. So we in New Mexico, we have approximately 625 public water systems. And then we had a focus of let's get that boundary for anyone who diverts more than 300 acre feet. And then if there's time and money left, then we'll dig deeper into those. So for some of those that were diverting less than 300 acre feet, she kind of did a best approximation based on information from maps that we had on file or place of use from their wells, stuff like that. So we have a report that's on it's probably not on our website, but I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the New Mexico Water Data Act. And I'll put that link in the chat here in a minute, but there is a report that explains the methodology that was used to create our boundary. I hope that answered your question, and happy to take any additional if I didn't explain that well.
No, that was fantastic, Julie. Thank you. And I'm sure there's many people who would love to dig into that methodology. And just to note that EPIC has been curating a lot of different resources about methodology. And again, we are here to help connect folks with some of that detailed information. So Julie, thank you. And thank you for the effort that you all have put in to get this data established. I wanted to also hit on something, Newakis, that you said, which I think is so important, which is on the theme of partnerships, working with multiple jurisdictions, but also the role that universities played and some of the technical assistance to digitize maps, to sort of do some of the work that Julie referenced that can really help jumpstart a project to develop system boundaries as well as a host of other tools. So I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about your partnership with universities and how that was a key part of your process.
Sure, it's something we've learned as we meet with these local communities that they're lacking, the skills and the software to be able to do some of this. And so we reached out to one of our local universities, and they had some master's students who were really looking for some hands-on experience in building out these systems. And so it was a really good, easy partnership because it was beneficial for both of them. So it ended up being something that I think we are trying to mimic around in other communities as well with other universities.
That's great. Thank you, Newakis. And I'm seeing a question in the chat that is sort of gets to the confidentiality of this data and maybe perhaps some resistance either at various levels of government, maybe to share this data. As a preview, this is something that we've encountered in the work that EPIC is doing, and we're trying to actually provide resources and point to examples of how other states or local governments have overcome some of those concerns. And so there's more to come, but Jesse, I wonder if you want to speak to that quickly, and then I'll maybe even turn it to the next part and let you just hold the mic.
Yeah, happy to. And I imagine that many of the folks that are in state agencies on the call today, Julie included, and I see many other states in the participant list would have responses as well. But I think one of the key distinctions that we often make with this data set in particular is that we are not looking at pipes. We're not looking at facilities, we're not looking at source of information. It is just the boundary of who those water systems serve. And that is the key that we think should be publicly accessible to then start to answer some of these other questions, and then not raise these security concerns that of other data sets that should be private. But happy to put more in the chat on that front, or we can come back to that as part of the discussion, or maybe Alan, I think you did raise this question initially, so if you have a follow-up, I am happy.
Yeah, I appreciate your point. I appreciate your point of view. The problem is it's not easy for utilities to separate those out. But if they've got computerized stuff, it's all on there. If they got, I've done plans before. Your plans show everything. And so, yeah, they can do that, but now you got to extract that out and just do the boundaries. And then, I don't know if you've run into issues where there's multiple water systems and multiple water sources. I'm thinking of Southern California. I mean, if you try and do this in LA, it's a mess. It's a nightmare because you've got Met that services their member agencies. They've got sub-member agencies, and then everybody has groundwater. Everybody.
Yeah.
To take care of it. So,
This is a great question. It has come up a lot, and I'm glad you raised it. I see Peter Cullihan from Internet of Water probably wants to take this question. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so thanks, Alan, and great point. It is a mess. Everybody who works on this is like, wow, what a mess. But it's part of our challenge, and our goal is to really kind of get under the hood and solve this problem. And to answer your first question about the security question and how all this utility data is kind of held together. So modernization helps with this problem. So like if you clean up the data and modernize it, then it can be the data that needs to be protected can be protected. So in the old days, when Joya and I started this work many years ago, we used to talk about open data a lot, and now we don't use that word so much because we know it's sort of alarming to people. What we mean is modern data, because modern data can be protected and made safe, and the parts of it that need to be made public can be made public. And the idea is you publish metadata about parts of the system that you need, but all of this requires cleanup, right? And kind of all those distinctions, it's a gnarly problem. You picked a perfect example, like in Los Angeles. It's not easy, but I think the goal of our work is to encourage everyone, states and everyone who manages this type of data, to modernize it.
Yeah.
So that it can be protected and made safe and made public where necessary, so we can take full advantage of it.
So Peter, since I represent the state agencies, I can guarantee the vast majority of states don't have this data. They don't have it, and to a degree they don't want it. They have enough problems managing the data that they need, that they have to have.
Yeah.
And so now, and the systems, I think it varies primarily based on system size. So again, caveat here, I'm on the board of Fairfax Water, top 25 system, $200 million budget. They got computer stuff out the wazoo. So that's great, but you go out to the hills in Shenandoah Valley, their system there, it's all paper. And so, and my response to those systems is those people know where they get their water. They know exactly. They're in a small town of 5,000. They see the tank there. They get the bill from the water company. They get the annual CCR, unless they're renters. There was a point made earlier. I get it. Renters are a legitimate issue. And part of the utility's job is to try and reach out to the renters on CCRs, and that's all over the place, because you mail it to people that you have a mailing address to, and that'll be the landlord. That's how it works.
Thank you so much for bringing those perspectives, and Peter, thank you for jumping in. And I just want to also name a huge shout out to Emily and the Internet of Water team for the more we can dramatically lower the cost and the technical capacity required to do this type of work, the better off we'll be. So tools like Boundary Sync and others are really going to help, I think, take us from where we were to where we can be. Unfortunately, we're going to have to keep moving into the next section of this webinar. But the good news is that next section is really intended to be even more of a dialogue. So we really invite more voices in. I'm going to kick it over to Jesse to start us off, but please keep putting questions in the chat or letting us know if you want to raise your hand, and we'll do our best to get your voices in.
No, and I think, Alan, you perfectly queued up this next section, which is that it is going to take a lot of work from many different stakeholders to improve and make a publicly accessible national map of where people get their drinking water from. And in some cases, the point with a radius might be good enough because it might be representative of that small community where they might not have the technical skill sets to develop the data themselves. But then again, as Joya was saying, to the extent that we can support in developing this data through public-private partnerships with academics and the like, I think we can really get to that national understanding. And I think the diverse representation we have on this call exactly showcases the folks that are interested and willing to engage. But one of the things, again, that we wanted to focus on is the role that states in particular have in developing and maintaining this data to improve and the design of implementation of water infrastructure, rates, droughts, and numerous other programs. And over the last year, what we've done is really thought about, had many conversations with states that have the data and don't have the data, and what are the challenges that they face in developing such information, and what information might be helpful to them. And so we created the state playbook that is designed to be a resource to state actors, but also to local and federal partners as well. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Anthony DeRosa from ASWA to speak about this in greater depth.
Hey, team. Yeah, I'll keep my comments short. Very happy to be here. I'm Anthony DeRosa with the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. Lots of great points and lots of good discussion brought up. And so I'm glad that we're getting into all of the challenges with this. So I'd first just like to express, appreciation to EPIC and their team for all the great work that they've done. There's a lot of complexities and challenges with both collecting and maintaining these data. But I think, kind of pulling back from a national perspective, there's it's a very powerful data set. And I think not only in supporting and promoting environmental justice and equity, but more broadly benefiting the National Drinking Water Program by better connecting communities with critical information about their drinking water. And then even more broadly than that, the potential to some point in the future intermingle drinking water data quality or drinking water quality data, with other environmental and public health data to kind of give a more robust picture of these different factors that might be impacting on communities. And so, from my position, it's always exciting to see all the different ways that, to use Peter's example, we're modernizing our data flows and finding new ways to promote displaying data for the public good. So it very encouraged by all of the cooperation here. And again, just for those states that are interested in kind of learning more, I think, Jesse's kind of teeing up the state playbook that they have, which provides some pathways that people can evaluate, maybe to overcome some of those complexities. But certainly if there's any role that I can play in assisting, connecting people with information or anything like that, I'm here to be a resource. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Jesse. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. And so what you're seeing on the screen here are just kind of the 6 main sections that we heard questions about and hopefully can provide some guidance and best practices. And that includes what's the status of the data and how can they use the approximations as a leverage point and basically not starting from scratch in the roughly 30 states that don't have a process yet for developing and maintaining this data. The second were these state-specific case studies, which I put in the chat, but we elaborated on the experience of New Mexico, California, Utah, and one other state that I'm not going to remember right now, but you can learn more about what the policies and processes that were in place, the funding that they use, and the partnerships to develop this data and how it's being used. Planning, budgeting, resources, we give some estimates of what we've seen in terms of how much this might cost, and then really dive into the methods of best practices and lessons learned from other states in developing this data. And then the last piece that I think is also really important, and we want to make sure that this information is shareable and accessible, so we give some guidance about how that can be the case. So playbooks in the chat, and again, we're here as a resource to states that are looking at how to develop this data in the long run. And so now we're at the section again of Q&A. We started a bit before, but wanted to open it up to the audience and really hear from you all. I think what we've been seeing is just such a flurry of activity around this particular data set and interest in water quality more broadly. There are so many different stakeholders that are using the data for different things, that are improving upon some of the approximations, that are trying to make sure that the information is accessible to the partners that could use it. So we started a Google Doc just to at least start getting some more information and for folks to start connecting the dots and reaching out to other collaborators that might be useful in your work. And so that's there as a resource, and we'll share that out again after the webinar, but wanted to open it up to the audience for any questions that you'll have, but also how you're using the data. And I'm gonna start with Ryan from Simple Labs. And I saw you answering many questions in the chat already. So if there's anything that you wanna elaborate on, please feel free.
Yeah, so the reason we were drawn to this data, our business is, about trying to help people gain insights into their water quality. And so we do direct-to-consumer test kits, but increasingly we're using data tools for this. We did this effort where we collected water quality data from a bunch of utilities, And envisioning tools to put this into people's hands, we imagined, like, what if a user could type in their address and we could tell them what their water quality is? They wouldn't need to know their utility. Many people don't. We could just match it up based on the address. And so this led us to the problem that I think all of us are pretty familiar with, that even when you get this publicly available data of utilities, we know their names, we know their IDs, we know what states they're in, but we don't know exactly where, or even roughly where they are located. And so this is a real problem for creating these tools. So this led us to this SAB project. We were very fortunate to be able to pair up with you guys, Epic, on doing it, and Internet of Water. And by the way, I'm going to drop a link to the blog. There were some technical questions. I'll just throw that all to the blog. Yeah, after doing that, it was able to enable a bunch of tools for us. There's one that's publicly available called City Water Project. I'll link to that too. And then we've got some others that are coming that we're pretty excited about. So yeah, it's been really helpful for us, and I'm curious to hear about other people's experiences as well.
Thanks, Ryan. Next, I'm going to pass to Amy Alvarez from True Elements. I believe y'all wanted to share some of your experience as well.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I'm Amy Alvarez, product manager at True Elements. And at True Elements, we are using this drinking water service boundaries to make it easier for end-to-end users have the most accurate information about their public water system. And we collect information from CCRs or state drinking water systems related to lab sampling. And we analyze the data, weight the data, and create a TrueQI score between 70 and 100, and plot it out a map and overlay it with the surface water boundaries. And it helps us create these digital twins of these watersheds and what the score is in these public water systems. So it's been fantastic. It's a fantastic data set.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm just going based on who I'm getting messages from in the chat. So I'm going to next pass it to some folks at University of Pennsylvania. Henry Feinstein.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, my name is Henry Feinstein. I'm a research assistant working with Professor Allison Lassiter, who's also on the call at the University of Pennsylvania. Our work is looking at trying to measure the risk that water suppliers along the East and Gulf coasts face to the intrusion of salt into drinking water supplies. This is an increasing issue due to sea level rise and really poses some serious public health problems if suppliers don't know what's happening and can't address it effectively. And so what I'm working on is trying to measure how vulnerable those suppliers are to this event if it were to happen. And a lot of that has to do with demographics of the people they serve, as well as the proximity to other water suppliers. And so EPIC's data set has been really invaluable. It's kind of the core of that vulnerability modeling. And something I've been working on is trying to improve some of the tier 3 boundaries in the data set for our purposes. We've collected data on the location of water intakes for many water suppliers along the East and Gulf coasts. And using those intakes, we can relocate and in some cases actually reshape the boundaries using census data into something that may be a little more accurate and reflective of where that water supplier is truly located, as opposed to something like a county centroid. And so I've been working on that. I've been talking to EPIC about that process and how it's been going. We certainly have some issues we're still working through, but it's been a really amazing data set for us. And yeah, happy to fill any questions about how I'm looking to improve the tier 3 boundaries.
Thanks, Henry. I mean, I think, yeah, anyone from the chat, any of the participants as well, welcome any questions that y'all have for panelists that we've had to date, or from some of the others. And so just looking back, in the chat, we'll give folks a minute here.
I also see a lot of activity in the Google document. Thank you all for contributing there. This repository of understanding how you're using this and how you might improve upon the map is really a wonderful resource for this community.
I'll wait a bit longer. I mean, I'm curious, Steve Mellers, I might I'll pass it to you, because one of the things that happened throughout the development of this data was we tried to see what publicly accessible URLs there might be. At the very beginning, we found about 11. As I mentioned, over the course of the last 16 months, we've been finding more and more. And just last week, we found, I think you reached out to us for Colorado's data set, and that is a fully publicly accessible data set that we're looking forward to incorporate here. And I was curious if there was anything that maybe you wanted to add to the conversation about how y'all developed the data in Colorado, and thoughts on how we can kind of sync up these data sets more cohesively.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, so in Colorado, I think there's about 220 incorporated municipalities. About 25% of the population lives in unincorporated areas, so that's a whole different animal. And then there's over 500 water providers for those 200 or so incorporated areas. And so we developed one data set, which I would encourage you to think about publishing. I haven't looked at everything you have, but a point data set that just has, like, you can put markers on a map to say, all right, what organizations are there that provide water? And then the boundaries are a separate thing. And one of the things we've been struggling with also is getting the boundaries for all those entities. And the Department of Local Affairs puts out a data set for special districts, but not city utilities. So you have to go to each utility, which I've seen mentioned. So I think a big part of this is developing some kind of workflows to pull in data from utilities, and maybe putting folks into cohorts to say, you know, these utilities publish their data. Let's figure out the process for how to pull that in and version it. How often does it get updated? And for the cohort that needs a tool like the one that we saw demoed, okay, figure out how to do that, and how does that get versioned and pulled in, and just try to make the big machine work, right? And so I would be happy to talk more about what we're doing. And yeah, we have, one of the big problems is in an urban area, you have the boundaries overlap. They're at different resolution. And so you put in an address and you get 3 water providers, and then people are confused. So there is some GIS work to be done there. I'll stop at that.
Yeah, that's, I see Emily has her hand up, and I'm going to respond to a few things that you said there. I think it's really interesting to think about the point data that could complement it. One of the other things that we were curious about is how the lead service line inventory requirements might implicitly guide us to the service area boundaries, and to what extent we could use the billing roster or the lead inventory data and then match that to the parcels to say this is where the boundary of that service area might be, and that we might be further ahead in 2 years from now than we are today. But I'm curious, Emily, go ahead with your question or response.
Yeah, so I just wanted to note, since I said in the chat and in response to Henry about improving the tier 3 data, and kind of in line with what Steve was saying too about how boundaries shift and change over time. Right now, the public water system data set that I shared the link to, that's hosted on HydroShare, that's available it's available as a geo package you can download. And it's what's in the map that's on the Epic map page. And I shared the Esri feature service too. We at the Internet of Water have a moderated process set up on GitHub to update that data set. So as we hear about or get better quality data, add data, there is a way to do that. There's a process to do that. There's like a standard data format for that. If you have questions beyond the scope of what we've discussed today, you're welcome to email me to talk about it further. And the Associate Director of the Internet of Water, Kyle Onda, is a great resource on that as well. But we do have a process for that for this particular data set I wanted to flag.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. One of the other things that I think has come up too, and what we did, right, for the systems that serve over 100,000 people, we do expect that they probably have this GIS data set, but they might not be in a state that manages a centralized repository for it. So we did, I think we reached out to about 63 different systems that we were in that large water system category to add their information to the overall national data set, and did get responses from about 50, which we thought was a pretty great overall success rate in adding more information where the GIS data does exist. So also thinking about the different types of resources and approaches that we can use for the size of that water utility as well.
If I could say one other thing, Jesse.
Yeah.
One thing that's really useful about that point data set, which is maybe just the location of their office or the centroid of their service area, is if you can have additional columns in that data set, like a URL to their lead whatever thing, or their water conservation program or whatever. And it does take time to figure those things out, but that's really helpful, because then somebody can find out, what's the drought situation or what's the wildfire situation. And we found that pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up a good point too, that we've wondered and put a little bit of guidance in the state playbook about just data standards and what would the helpful metadata or additional columns be for these past, like the different use cases that exist. And I was curious, I think, Michael, you mentioned this, is that something that your working group is thinking about? And if there's any opportunity to support or resource that we might be able to provide from the folks that have been trying this in different states.
Yeah, I think, Jesse, really briefly, we envision over the next few months of putting a call out for those interested to participate in helping develop a data standard. So yeah, definitely we want to engage with partners throughout the community that are interested in helping to develop a data standard.
That is great to hear and really timely. I actually didn't know that, so nice. Well, yeah, I guess in the last 5 minutes or so, any other questions? Again, this document I see is being populated quickly, which is great. I see if we know anyone who's working on the data in Tennessee, and I do know folks there, and I'm wondering, my colleague Jack Ding, if you're here and maybe want to speak to what y'all did in Tennessee. I don't know if you're in a position to speak. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, so with regard to the state of Tennessee, I will defer the question to Dr. Yolanda McDonald for more details. And then, yeah, but I think from what I know, most of them are pretty much aligned with other folks, especially with the Internet of Water. And, that approach that I saw, like that have the boundary sync, really helps a lot to address those detailed questions. And then from my understanding that the state of California first did that to get to distribute the larger effort to each individual water systems, so that they will be able to refine the boundary as much as they can. And then I think that's definitely a great place to or a great direction that heading forward to kind of like, what's the word, distributed work. So yeah, but is Dr. Yolanda McDonald here?
I don't see her on the call, but yeah, I'm more than happy to queue up folks that are interested in connecting with Yolanda. Her team has been working with Tennessee for the past, I think, several years on developing the data there. And I guess the other thing that I would note is that there are, I think, 4 other states that maintain a private database. And we have been in touch with them about how to bring that into the public sphere and are there aspects of that information that could be made publicly available. I see that there's questions of folks if there's anyone working in Indiana or Alabama. I do not know anyone, but I think that's also the goal of this conversation, to say, like, who's out there who's working on different aspects and how can we start facilitating those connections between folks. But I would say those are probably states that are ripe for engagement.
Oh, by the way, just one more comment on the state of Tennessee. I see Karen in the chat dropped the question. So according to the CIVIS database, yes, there are 770 systems, but only 430 something are the community water systems. And then really what we care about is the community water system, because those are the systems that provide water to the residents year long. And with regard to that, I think the state of Tennessee currently have the high 300 numbers in terms of the boundaries. But because of the MOUs and the other agreements that they have with the state agency, which is the Tennessee Department of the Environmental Conservation, they cannot make the data currently available to public yet. But I think that's down the line in the process. I think the initial agreement has a certain year limit of doing preparatory work before making it public, because there are other critical infrastructure involved in the current data boundary layers that they need to be removed before to make it public.
Yeah, great points. And I guess one other question, or one other thing that has been coming up or we've been thinking about is there are several states that have parts of the data and maybe aren't fully ready to publish it. And I think that was the case in the state of New Hampshire. And I was curious, Emily, if you could speak to kind of the work that y'all did to get it to that last 5% to be ready for prime time as a publicly available data set, and if that might be the case in other states as well.
Sure. I was thinking about the New Hampshire process earlier when we talked about submitting the Freedom of Information Act and kind of the Homeland Security issues there. So New Hampshire was a state that does not publicly share their data as is. And I did submit a FOIA request. It took a little figuring out to get to which agency. So for anyone going after this data, it just can depend state to state sometimes. And what we did was work with some folks in New Hampshire that had polygon of buffered pipe data. And we worked with them to obfuscate the data in a way where they were satisfied that it was representative of their service area while not sharing, as we've discussed, any kind of personal identifiable information. So we kind of aggregated the buffered pipelines up to a parcel level, and they were satisfied enough with that. And that is what we ended up using in the map. So interestingly enough, again, a caveat, the state of New Hampshire told us that they were going through like a modernization of their data and that the buffered lines were like 10 years old, but that was the best that they had. So hopefully in the future, it can be updated overall. But point being, there are ways around, sharing information that can sometimes be a little iffy to share for whatever concerns. So there are creative ways to get around that still can result in valuable information.
Yeah, and I think it's just a great example of that. Maybe took 2 days worth of work to get it to a place that it was ready for public. So sometimes the list might not be as big as we think it is to develop this information. But I guess just want to take this last minute to say thank you again to everyone that joined, that stuck around to the end, that participated, that's interested, and has contributed in the document, but also over the last several months as we create this publicly available data set of who gets drinking water from who. As we mentioned, this is just, I think, a strong start, but there are many places where we can still improve the data, and just really appreciate y'all's partnership and collaboration and bringing that together. We are going to share this recording. We will share slides. We will share the resources. And again, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.